Hey everybody, I hope you're seeing 2020 out with a bang or some sort of quiet celebration. It's been a year, and thank you all so much for, if you're watching this, being here on my YouTube channel, being interested in what I'm doing, and I can't thank you enough for that, and I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. But I'm still working on Joe Death and the Graven Image. I'm working on the final draft right now, and a lot of that process is on Patreon. I've been there, I guess, most significantly through the whole year, and less on Instagram and other social media, just for the ability for me to focus. But today in this video, it's about my friend Shen Leidigh, who is an independent cartoonist who's just finished his first book and is putting it up on Kickstarter. Shen and I have known each other for, I guess, several years and have talked back and forth. And it's always a blast because he brings things into my world that I would never, ever bring into my world. I would never ever know about or care, but once it's delivered by Shen, I automatically care a whole lot. So he's got a special ability to do that, I think, and I hope that comes through on the video. Being on a video with Shen is very different than being in the room with Shen. But his book, Psychedelic, Singularity, is a wonderful drama between the natural world and technology. And I think there's a really good positive spin on it, instead of just a kind of a battle that results in nihilistic ideas. So check it out. I'll put the links below for my Patreon and also Shen's Kickstarter below. The Kickstarter for Shen's book, The Psychedelic Singularity, will finish on January 3rd. So it's not a whole lot of time, but check it out, see if it's right for you, and throw some dollars at this guy because he is very independent, and there's no publishing arm behind him, and so he would appreciate it a whole lot. But don't do that because it's a charity or anything. It's a very good story, and he's a real passionate cartoonist, and you'll see just his love for drawing and storytelling on the pages, and I'll have some pages here floating for you to see. But I'll actually be lettering the book as well, and I just couldn't let him do computer type with this book because it's such an organic book. I just really wanted to add a human element to the lettering. And so I guess I am part of that book, that project. So I hope you enjoy the interview. We ramble a lot, and that's pretty typical to our conversation. But it's nice because I don't know. Maybe I just like stories like that, and I like time to just be with someone and see where their interests take us. So. As per my channel, you kind of just get a real honest picture of how I talk and my guests as well, and my work. And I'm trying not to apologize for that because there's a lot of people that are doing this better than I am as far as making videos and interviewing people and just being a real dynamic like media company. And I'm not that, and I don't really want to be that. But I do want to share and just be a part of the conversation that everyone's having as they go along on their journey, their life, and their work. And so I hope I've provided that for you here. But without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Cool. All right, we're now recording, and Shen, how you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to see your Kickstarter is fully funded.
Yeah, and we're almost up another 1,000. So
okay, close to
doing
13
well.
now. Perfect. I know you. You know me. People that are backing your Kickstarter know you, but probably the people that watch my YouTube channel don't know you. Can you just tell us like who you are and what you've done with this book, what you've written, and
okay.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Shen Leidigh, and it's a bit of an unusual name, I suppose. I'm the only one that I know of in the world.
Really? You're the only Shen Leidigh?
Yeah. Well, Shen Leidigh.
Yeah.
There's lots of Shens.
Yeah.
But my last name comes from 1700s Germany. That was the last time we know of that a Leidigh actually lived in Germany. We don't know what it meant exactly. It was a very rare name, and we have the genealogy though, where the last Leidigh left Germany and came to Philadelphia, I think.
Okay.
In the 1730s, and he had 3 sons that fought in the Revolutionary War.
Oh man.
And then, of course, it just gets all I'm not going to give you the whole family history, but that's where the first Leidighs came to America. It was like 1735. Shen, of course, some people associate it with Eastern philosophy and things like that. It means something there, but my parents actually named me after the Egyptian hieroglyphic.
What?
It's the cartouche that goes around the pharaoh's name. That stands for like divine protection. That is known as a Shen ring, and so yeah.
Wow.
So a bit of the hippie stuff sort of creeping in there.
Yeah. So your parents were kind of old school hippies.
Sort of. I mean, with their own twist on it.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah, as they should.
Yeah. That's a lot of the people that we grew up around.
That's
so
right.
In the Pacific Northwest and Montana and Idaho, Oregon and Washington.
Yeah.
And Northern California. I spent, a lot of my time growing up in all those areas.
Yeah.
And there's like definitely a West Coast sort of hippie vibe to a lot of the stuff there and the people. So
yeah. So like I'm curious about the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Have you ever asked your parents like, what were you looking at? How did they know about Egyptian hieroglyphics?
Well, it's actually a name from the Bible. So
okay.
They named all us children Bible names, but very obscure, strange Bible names that aren't actual names of people.
Yes. Okay.
So
that's fascinating. Well, I like that.
It's as good a place as any.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's a good name. And it's nice that you are the only Shen Leidigh in the world. You're not like fighting.
As far as I know. It's a very unusual name.
Not fighting over domains much. So okay, that's great. So your sort of experience has been on the West Coast and Middle America, and the book that you wrote is very much a part of that, right? The location is specific to
the West Coast specifically, and it goes some of the locations I use the actual names of the locations in the book. Yeah. Other locations like Portland, I changed the name of.
Yeah.
Like Seattle, I changed the name of.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like an other worlds sort of a book. It takes place not exactly in our world, but close enough.
And you had no you didn't need to fabricate a whole world and a whole cosmology. You just
right. No.
Decided
it's definitely in. It's like I don't ever mention the United States.
Yeah.
Right, as a country in the book, but it clearly is, right?
Yeah.
I actually have in there. You can actually figure out exactly what year the book takes place in, even though I don't ever mention it. Due to the fact that the full moon falls on a summer solstice.
Okay.
And so if you can figure out when the next full moon falls on a summer solstice, I think it's like 2045, something like that. Okay. So it is possible for the reader to figure out through things I mentioned exactly what year the book takes place in the future, but I don't specifically mention a date. No.
So you're a moon guy. So I've been.
It's the solstice today, actually.
Is it? Oh yeah, the winter solstice.
It's the solstice and the great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn.
Ah, right now.
But
today.
It's the first time Jupiter and Saturn have been this close in 400 years.
Wow. That's amazing. So, okay, yeah. So the moon as a sort of a clockwork type of thing is interesting because Tolkien did that, or he was very specific about it, like the calendar corresponding to a certain historical time, and then what would be the moons, and that's really, I love that. It would be very hard for me to do that. I mean, I could probably try, but thinking about that in a very, very analytical way, I think you do that a lot. I mean, just over multiple conversations with you.
Well, that's just one of the, it's just one of the many little things that's in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that I thought about and put a lot of thought into in writing the book, and is there as a tangible thing in the book. Yeah, that readers can see, but I don't make a point of pointing it out.
Yeah. So so I want to talk about that, but first, can you give me one or two sentences description of what the book is, just to kind of let everyone know? It's called Psychedelic Singularity.
Yeah, it is a. I could say it's a very, very basic, like Joseph Campbell Hero's Quest sort of a story on one level. Mm-hmm. But you actually have a quest and a progression and a resolution for multiple characters throughout the book. Mm. And it is narrated from a first person perspective. That's another thing I keep forgetting to mention. So, the little panels that are narration are from a first person perspective from Milton Defoe, the man, the main character. I could say the main character, but there's multiple protagonists, I guess you could say. Yeah. But so it's narrated from his perspective. So on one level, it is very much that it's not some strange trip where you can't understand what's happening and characters do it's not like a dream sequence. It's not like an extended dream sequence, and nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's lots of graphic novels that do that sort of thing, but it's very much a linearly structured narrative story with specific story point, highs and lows story points leading to a resolution. But at the same time, there's deeper levels to it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I've said before is that I tried to write it for the eyes, the mind, and the heart. Mm. Yeah. Oh, cool. Right. So I want it to work on all three levels. I want it to work for people who are looking for just for a visual extravaganza to actually have an aesthetic pleasing book that they can look through. And wouldn't even necessarily even have to read the words, although there's lots of writing, but could just follow along through the book. They could tell what was happening. They could see, and it would be visually pleasing. And then the mind, of course, comes into the actual plot, the writing, all the special stuff I put in there, like the moon cycles or whatever, all the different things. Yeah. And then I want it to touch people on a deeper level. I want it, on the heart level or the soul level, I want people to get a certain amount of stuff out of the book, if possible. If it works correctly, I think it works on all three levels. Oh man, I love that. I think that's true of most. I think that's true of most great art. Yeah, not equating my book to great art, but just if it works right, I think most art, whether it's on any sort of whatever medium you want to choose, I think it works on most of those levels. Yeah, I think that's.
It's best to shoot for it and you know, have some sort of like goal. I like that. Even thinking about it as a kind of a checklist for yourself. Like, you know, you've maybe written a chapter or you've written a.
I don't think I never thought of it that way though. I don't have a checklist. I don't go about it analytically like that. How I look at it is like, it's like music, right? If you know about music, which I don't know very much about music, I'm not musical at all.
Yeah.
But I know enough about music, right, that I can listen to a song and it can hit the beat, right? It has that hook. That's what I look at as like the visual aspect, right? And visual is too small. I mean the sensory aspect of any given part of art, right?
Sure.
Whether it's dance or music or artwork or reading, there's a sensory aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, you know, the mind aspect. Like I can listen to a song and I can see what they did as far as, you know, where they put the beats in or where the different instruments come in or how they made a certain sound to create a certain thing. And then, of course, as everybody knows, music can profoundly impact you emotionally and spiritually. And so, I mean, that's the thing. If I'm writing the book, if I'm writing and I'm creating a book, if I'm doing it, if I'm feeling it right, it's going to check all those three boxes without me coming in and trying to micromanage it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you as the creator. So, I mean, we are different people. And I think you can't necessarily think like have all those three things like going for you all the time, like as you're creating something.
You can back out and sort of fine tune things with that in mind. But when you're in the creative process of doing things, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't be thinking about it. Yeah. You're gonna freeze up and stumble.
Yeah.
Right? You're not gonna get it. It's not gonna hit right.
Right.
You know? I don't know. That's just my perspective. I think if you look at most, you know, you I like watching like music documentaries, right? And I was watching some recent thing with Steven Tyler of what's that band? Aerosmith. And they were describing how he recorded one of his favorite, you know, one of these famous songs. I can't remember which one, but how they didn't have marachas, so he used like a sugar packet and turned the mic up really, really high and shook it into the packet, and all these, you know, you listen to these older documentaries of these older musicians from back when things were not all digitized, right? Where they did live recording sessions for their actual studio albums. It was all, you know, they'd get everybody in a room, they'd all record, you know, whatever song. And a lot of the favorite and most resonant parts of famous songs comes from the interaction of band members and happy little accidents and how they were feeling in the room when it happened. And I think if one thing, to bring it back to the book, you know, that's something I'm sort of commenting on a little bit, is that as everything with technology gets like harder and sharper and more brittle and easy to use, I think the soul is getting slowly ground out of artwork and of consumable media and culture in general.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah. No, and I like that. You know, it goes back to that, you know, it's an ancient thing. It's like the you know, man versus machine, but that's too simplistic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, man creates the machines. It's just
right. Like it's a sort of an abdication of responsibility in a way. You know, like I think the dangers of technology are that assigning something else to do your work for you, like you know, that is convenience, that is productivity stuff, and I'm sure micro, there are great things about it and stuff, but those are the things that seem to lead us in a worse direction, where a tool to help you write or help you draw, or, papers, a computer to make something like color a comic, or there are direct tools that you can use to create something that is still has a lot of your DNA.
Right. Well, here's the thing. It's a debate that people have a lot, and I just saw somebody commenting about this earlier today, actually, saying, it's all just tools, and that, don't shame digital artists. And I agree with that completely, because without digital artists, the internet wouldn't exist. The internet is its own thing. And that's part of what I'm talking about, or try to talk about in this book as well. It's not bad. Yeah. I don't assign a moral value to what tools people use or what new things people do. That's the inevitable, moving on of society and humanity and progress and technology. But at the same time, I feel that melancholy that I think Tolkien definitely had, right? Of the loss of something. And I think that's equally valid. I think that's equally true. Because you have the one side saying, why can't we do everything digitally? Why, it's all just tools, but at the same time, we are losing something. Yeah. I mean, as generationally, as artists, in 20 or 30 years, there's going to be almost no one left who can paint at the skill level, even of the masters in oil and pastels and stuff can do today. Yeah. Those aren't skills that you can get overnight. That's not something that raw talent can give you. That takes 20 or 30 years to be able to be like Greg Hildebrandt or Frank Frazetta or any of these people who are just masters at mixing and doing paints. And I've painted a lot traditionally, and it's darn hard. It's difficult. Yeah, I've kind of felt this as well recently, where it almost, I'm 31, you're mid 30s? 37.
37.
Almost 38.
Okay. And that's not an old person, but
it all depends on what you've been through.
Yeah, and
age is relative.
Right. And there's this sort of it does seem to be this sort of if you are choosing to put some certain artist or some certain tradition as your foundation, or as your high point, you are choosing a sort of a heartache. You're sort of choosing that feeling of loss. In a sense, because it's no longer the new. That's no longer the new way of doing art. I mean, tons of new artists are still looking at that, but if you're you did this book in ink, traditional ink,
right?
There's a certain
not even microns, actually a dipped pen into India ink, so as old school as you can get.
Yeah. And you were telling me how you've seen you've tried a lot of ink and a lot of different pens and stuff, and you're the actual tools, actual ink and the pens that you found.
I got a really old pen to actually draw it in.
Yeah. So you did say before that it's it's a very different.
It is, and I figured that out on my own. You won't find that in an art book or anything. It was something that I discovered, was that our ink today is different. Our pens today are not the highest quality. They're not as good quality as they were. And the pens are different. And I bring it down to just market forces. Yeah. In 1900, there were entire companies that were serious companies that focused on nothing but making the best ink and the best pens possible, because everybody used pens. Yeah. Everybody. Mm-hmm. If you were a billionaire who wrote your own letters to your mom, you were writing with a dipped ink pen in 1900, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted a really good pen. You wanted good ink. If you were an artist that was making art for like whatever, any kind of the big magazines that existed back then, there were a lot of artwork that was done with ink and with pens. Those were high level professionals, and they had to have something that would work on a certain like level, like a certain standard. And my theory is that it was the fact that it was important stuff. People really focused on it and were trying to make like good ink, smooth ink, paper that would take the ink well. And it just, the stuff I was buying at like, your local art store, and it was just so shoddy. It wouldn't work right. The ink keeps soaking into the paper. So I came up with the thing. I would buy Higgins India ink.
Yeah.
And then I would leave it to open air evaporate at room temperature until it reduced by half. So if I had a cup of ink, I would end up with half a cup of ink.
Wow.
And that almost entirely eliminated the issues I was having.
Interesting.
So it no longer soaks in feathers out into the paper. It doesn't drip off the pen as nearly as much. And it flows really smooth.
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that, when you were seeing this great ink work done about 100 years ago, their inks were a lot thicker and smoother, better. The pens were higher quality. And you simply can't get that today. So,
I mean, it kind of makes a lot of, it makes a lot of sense that you would, if you're looking for volume, you cut the ink with the water.
It's the standards aren't there because nobody actually cares enough. Or let's put it this way, there's not enough people to create a market force to make Higgins ink create better quality ink.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, would you say if you put it in context, so like Adobe and Apple, they are the sort of the popular choice for functioning artists, working artists, professionals of all kinds in creative field. They are the ones providing us our tools now, and they're incredibly wealthy companies. I mean, they've done amazing work and they provide amazing tools, and they have the money to show for it. And it's interesting because previously paper and ink and pencils, like these would be the same equivalent almost. Like those. I agree. Popular.
You're right conclusion.
Cool. So I'm sure our listeners have figured out a little bit about what the book has for it. So I did want to talk about like you started talking about the main character, Milton, and is he sort of the quintessential millennial young person?
Well, Milton hasn't been born yet.
Okay, because this is
he would be like a baby right now.
Okay. Let me just ask a general question. Who did you base him off of? Somebody? Is he you essentially, or
not really? No.
Yeah. Is he?
He's not definitely not me.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a lot of like a backstory.
Yeah.
To it. But yeah, he's like an everyman.
Yeah.
What I would imagine as like a slightly futuristic everyman sort of a character.
Mm-hmm. Trying to
well, and the name I based off of I based his name off the names of authors that wrote books that followed similar themes.
Yeah.
Right? So Milton, of course,
Milton.
Paradise Lost, and then Daniel Defoe, who wrote like Robinson Crusoe and different books like that, which I look at as like the first, it's the whole idea of going out into the wilderness by yourself, right? Sort of a thing.
Yeah. And you did that, right? You like, how old were you? What, there does seem to be a sort of a pivotal experience that you personally experienced and did that means a lot to this book. What was that?
Well, 9 years ago, so in 2011, I went on a 61-day solo hiking trip in Washington State, and just trying to figure stuff out. And I had this intense feeling that had been building up. Everything was just changing so rapidly, and I didn't know quite what to think about it, right? I felt like I needed just to slow stuff down for a moment.
Yeah.
And really, really think about things, because there was a lot of stuff building up, just personally and in the world. And I felt like I was working all the time, and I didn't have the time to really think about it, like really give it a good hard think.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to get back to nature and things. I grew up hiking, and I hadn't had the chance to for years then. And I was just, working and whatnot. And, I planned it out. This was going to be my one big hike trip. I figure, if I'm, and in retrospect, of course, it's terribly dangerous. I don't recommend anyone feeling inspired by my book to go out and do it, because there's a very good chance you will not emerge alive. So
yeah, you're quite a experienced.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The worst thing that could happen would be someone to read my book and get the idea that they're gonna go pulling into the wild and get some revelation, and it'll have like a 30% survival rate. That just not going to turn out well for anyone.
So did you? So before we get to the bear encounter, did you have a thought of like? Did you ask anyone if they'd want to go with you? I mean, this is about thinking. It's about coming in touch with yourself.
It's not something you can do with anybody else.
Yeah.
And I'd say that unequivocally. You can't ping pong stuff off your own mind when you're dealing with other people.
Yeah.
When you can't really think it over if you're having the input of other people's input into that kind of a level of deep, I don't know, you would say like spiritual change, but I don't know, that's a personal thing. I suppose it would depend on the relationship.
Sure.
You have with that person you're going with, but even then it's going to be revelations that are going to include that person and include that relationship.
Yeah, totally. That's fascinating, because I mean, I as well need to be enter into the story that I'm writing, and I can't do that if I'm in the room with someone else. It needs to be me alone. But then there's, I mean, as people who are watching this probably notice, you and I talk a lot, and I talk to other people too, and I found that to be a really helpful way to write. It's not like we're talking necessarily even about the stories that we're writing,
right?
Often,
although we do, but yeah. Well, I think what it comes down to is what mode are you in? What mode are you doing? Because I like to be around people when I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I can just sit and casually chat with someone while I'm actually working on something that's like not the really hard stuff, like a page composition, but like inking in or something that makes the time go by much faster. I really like, I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah.
I have no problem focusing in. In fact, I actually do it better if I'm around someone.
Yeah.
But if it's the really inspirational stuff, like the seeds of ideas and things like that, I'm better off alone when there's no one there.
Right.
And I think as far as it's great to go out into the wilderness alone and get the seeds for an idea, but in the actual writing of the body of the book, I bounced it off friends. I talked to, endlessly to different friends about it for years.
Yeah.
And that really helps, having any form of a little bit of feedback or even not feedback, just telling them about it, just working your own thoughts out through the process of telling it to someone.
Right.
And judging reactions and things like that. I think each experience has its own place in the creative process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I think too much of either one of those things, and you can lose your way in like creating something, you know. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to create the best work, I don't think, if you're just hiding out in a hut in the woods, you know, or like, you know, living in a tent and never interacting with anybody else. You're going to eventually start to spiral downwards into your own mind, and you're not going to keep up with like relevant stuff that's happening in the world. You're just going to retreat from things. I think a certain amount of that to think things over and get inspiration is good. But I think too much collaborative ends up diluting the true spirit of a work.
Yeah.
Unless in some rare occasions when people are so in tune with each other, collaborators that are really seem to be on the same wavelength and can, you know, hit that, just like with music, just exactly with music. I mean, you can see some bands where one band member leaves that you don't think would be a consequential member, right? Like the bassist or the drummer or something, and the whole band, their work just sucks afterwards forever. Right? Yeah. Like it's like the band breaks up, and I'm not going to say the name of different bands, but I'm thinking of very specific bands. They have a lead singer leave, and even though the lead singer might not have been the one to write the music, it all just falls flat immediately afterwards. Yeah. And so it's very much a dance. Can you find that right collaborator? You can't just mash people together. You can't just force people together and say, make good stuff. Yeah. It's like lightning striking. It's like magic.
Yeah.
Right? You can't, it's alchemy. You can't, and that's part of the frustrating part about it, living in a, you know, the capitalist society that we do. You want it to strike every single time. You want, you want the lightning to continue to strike every single time, because you've got, I'm not going to name any names of giant movie studios, right? Giant companies, movie studio companies, but they really seem to think that they've got an unbeatable formula down, right? That it always happens. They'll get, you know, whether it's, you know, MGM back in the 60s or something, right? Like you'll get these studios, and they're very smart. They get collaborators, they get different directors on board, they get writers on board, they get all these teams, and they'll have a run of like 10 or 15 years where they produce just fantastic stuff that resonates with the culture and resonates with the the population, and the films really work. Mm-hmm. But it can't last forever. It never does.
Yeah. So
there is no magic formula that you can write down on a paper and force people to follow, and that will continue to make relevant work.
Right. There does seem to be, I mean, like with everything I feel like we're talking about, this like a balancing type act. And, you know, like it is interesting to see that first, it's almost like tracing a human growth, or just any sort of living thing growing, where like Pixar was an experiment. I mean, it was not something that people were like, yeah, that's going to be successful. It was just a group of people that thought there was something there, and they did have enough money to live on and experiment with, from investors or investors, I suppose. And, you know, they're needing to do something that is very good in a market sense to grow. I mean, so it's like Toy Story. Like, I mean, just any early things. If we know about them later, like if they did become successful, they had to hit a popular mark in their first or second experiment. Of course, those are the ones we know about. So there's always like a things that we know, and then there's things that we don't know. And it is interesting that like time limit that you either have or you don't have. And yeah, it's like,
well, it's pressures. It's pressure.
Yeah.
I think I'm a firm believer, after having my own experience, you create your best stuff when you're under a certain amount of pressure to succeed. Yeah. And that can be financial pressure to succeed, or, you know, peer pressure, or whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah.
A lot of times people do great stuff, and not the best stuff, obviously, because they're still students, but they do great stuff coming out of college, right? Like, because they're in that peer group. And, forget about grades. That's one pressure. But just like the peer group of all your, being around a lot of the people that you're with that are other artists, and you want to show them that you can do something good, right? And get their admiration. That's a certain amount of pressure.
Yeah.
I think you can back way out on like a cosmic scale and look at it through sort of like an evolutionary lens in a way. With as far as like, why do trees grow tall? Why do trees grow tall and strong in a forest with other trees? Right? You would think that they would grow tall and strong on a field with nobody there. Right? With no other trees, because they have they have like the maximum amount of sunlight and water, right? Yeah. You'd think you could plant an oak tree in the middle of a marsh, in the middle of a field, and it has all the right components, right? You would think it would do great, and it ends up this stunted little
interesting
thing that, because it doesn't have that competition for resources that drives it forward. Oh, now, too much competition for resources, and it dwindles and dies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not healthy either. Yeah. There's a certain amount of spacing, like in a forest, certain amount of spacing and diversity of like the ground and the rocks and what you would think that planting a tree on like soft soil would be best. Well, it's best for when the tree is small, right? But as the tree grows, it actually needs deeper rocks to like twist its roots around and hold on, or the first wind that comes along will topple it right over. So that's how I think. I see analogies like that to all like different artistic endeavors and things like this.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have a certain amount of like wind is a big driver on trees. If you don't have a certain amount of wind that continually buffets the tree, it actually will be a weaker tree. The wood will be weaker, the roots will be weaker, everything will not be ready for the first big wind that comes along because it won't have grown. Trees will actually put their roots down heavier against the prevailing wind.
Yeah.
To a huge degree, right?
Yeah.
And this, of course, goes into the emergence of new technologies. Right? Okay. New technologies are to older industries what like a wind from the south is to an oak tree where the prevailing wind has been from the east its whole life.
Huh. Yeah.
When you have that happen, when you have a wind come along, when I was a kid, we had a windstorm come in 1994, and it was it was sustained 40-mile-an-hour winds. It was a storm that rolled in, and it was straight from the south, which was highly unusual. Yeah. The wind always comes directly from the east, right? You can know what direction the wind comes. The moss is always growing on like the east side of the tree, or the west rather. The wind comes from the west, and it was like nothing you've ever seen. When that wind came from the south, trees that had stood for 600 years were falling like dominoes. I was watching them fall outside my house. You go outside and you just hear the trees breaking all over like firecrackers going off. And you can see the trees falling, just toppling and toppling. And when you'd go and you'd look at the root clod afterwards, you'd see these giant roots, like 3 feet through the center, and they're all bracing for a wind that's coming from the west.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right? And that's what I see in, new technologies, emerging stuff as far as art or anything else you want to look at.
Yeah.
You have a certain structures in place, and everybody builds up their resilience and their strength in one direction.
Yeah.
Right? And then something new comes along like Photoshop, and a lot of traditional artists just get blown right over.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love the natural like illustrations and analogies and it's because it's refreshing, because I mean like I'm more removed than you are from probably the natural world, and like especially growing up and it just seems to be the case that most of us, if we're watching something on YouTube are very removed from the natural world and the wisdom that there is held contained in the kind of fabric of the universe and the natural world. And it's like we're more comfortable talking about personal relationships or creations in like technological illustrations or something. Or
I think you're right, and I think we haven't yet begun to see the long-term societal impacts of what that's doing to us as a human species. Now, specifically, the emergence, and this goes a lot into my book, is the emergence of social media interaction. It is not the same. You always, the typical thing is to say, well, they complained about the telegram too, and then they complained about the telephone, and then they complained about cell phones, and then now they're complaining about social media and the internet interactions. And what I would say is, while there are common elements among that, and there is sort of a generational flow of change, right? This is happening far faster, and it's far more impactful than things that have happened in the past. Right? And it's happening at such an incredible, increasing rate. I just get this sense that most people aren't understanding just how historically fast this is.
Yeah.
Right. Like classical example I use is 2001, right?
The space
when 9/11 happened in 2001, almost no one on those airplanes even had cell phones.
Yeah.
There was like one or two people that made cell phones. Nobody had cell phones.
Yeah.
2001, it was pretty rare, actually. They were very expensive. When I got my first Verizon wireless, like my Verizon flip phone in 2006, I think, I had to go through a credit check.
Yeah.
It was like $70 a month. Text messages on my plan that I was able to get, text messages were 50 cents a piece.
Yeah.
To send a text message was 50 cents a piece. And so you fast forward 10 years to 2016, and 10 years is a very remarkable short amount of time.
Right.
You go forward, and almost every single person I knew had a large screen smartphone and are watching YouTube videos on a phone.
Yeah.
Right? In the space of 10 years, the industry, the cell phone and social media industry, changed 5 or 6 different times.
Mm-hmm.
Like changed and evolved into something else 5 or 6 different times in the space of 10 years. Like a insect rapidly molting, and changing into something completely different. Like
it's like the Alien on Alien, where it's like this little tiny thing that comes out of your stomach. It's like so small, but in a matter of hours, it's huge.
It happens so rapidly that they almost can't keep up with advertising campaigns.
Yeah, well, it's like
right?
They don't even need to anyway. I mean, it's
right. Like they tried to start advertising new features on a phone, and before half the population can even figure it out, they have to start something new because something completely different had come out.
Yeah,
but it still does fall into my pattern that I have discovered, and I can't remember. I never wrote it down. I think I might have told you about it in the past. That there seems to be like a certain steps that society goes through with new technology. It's like it starts with invention, and then there'll be like 10 years, and then it becomes I think it went invention, adaptation, integration, and saturation, I think were the words that I came up with. And they seem to go in about 10-year chunks with most things.
Yeah.
So you could look at look at the automobile, right? Oh, and the final one was transformation. So first a new technology will be invented, like cars in the 1890s, right? That was when they first, like a little electric cars, autonomous vehicles that weren't on rails. and they were electric, and they had a little steering stick, and they were, in different places like Paris and London, New York. And then, so that was you could say that was the invention of the car. I'm sure someone would say, well, actually, some scientist invented it in 1875. Well, okay, but say 1890, and then roughly 10 years later, they had adapted the car, right? So it started to evolve. It began to adapt. It molted its first shell, and in 1904, you had the Model T, right? I think it was 1904. The Model A, Model T finally came along. And then, don't quote me on like the different terms that came up for the different stages, right? Wow. But by the 1920s, so 10 years later, just 10 years later, you had like a widespread use of the car. Cars were everywhere in the 1920s, right? By the 1930s, they really were everywhere. That's like the saturation phase, right? Yeah. By the 1930s, let's put it this way, self-propelled internal combustion vehicles, right? Not just cars. So by the 1930s, it was saturation. Every farm is going to have them all over the Western world. You got airplanes flying all over the skies. You got, it's 10 years later in the 1940s is transformation. Right? So that's when they start, they build the interstate highway system. They completely tear down old cities to build roads wide enough so cars can go through. I see. Right? Like it actually transformed the entire world. Yeah. So in the space of 40 years, right, a new technology completely transforms the world. Yeah. If it takes off. And I'm sure someone has put it more eloquently than that. But that was like this idea that I came up with, and I thought to myself, well, how can we overlay? I started to overlay that onto other technologies, right? Like trains followed that same pattern. It was about 40 to 50 years, like the steam engine. Yeah. And then I realized that you could actually overlay that with cell phones, right? Yeah. And in the internet coinciding and get that same pattern. And cell phones actually were invented a long time ago. Yeah, interesting. Like 30, 40 years ago. We are entering into the transformation phase.
We're in the transformation phase.
Of mobile technology and cell phones and the internet.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think the last 10 years were the saturation phase. Yeah. So if you went from 2010 to 2020, is total saturation. So almost every homeless person that I know or that I see has a cell phone. Yeah. It's total saturation. Everyone has them. And now we're entering into the transformation phase.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm at some sort of like a technology counselor. But, I'm 31. I don't think that should feel like I'm old, but it does seem like that because of the it's like I look around and I'm like, do younger people have a fondness for VHS tapes or cassette tapes or like radio? Like I love media, but all of the media, like the experience of like putting in a Nintendo 64 cartridge and like the physical things. And also maybe a higher degree of social interaction, even though I was more, I was more of a, I don't know, not a loner, but I did like being alone even as a kid. It just seems like the fondness, even my choice to do art now is on traditional means with paper and pencils and then scanning it into Photoshop. I mean, it just seems like, There's a reason why I kind of feel old if I'm looking at it through that lens when I see people like animating and drawing and creating comics on their iPad, and I'm like, I just cannot. I wouldn't enjoy that. I could do it maybe, but I
think the thing is I don't make judgment calls on the betterness or worseness.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Just because you lose something when, like, the classic example, to use that Cars analogy, is we lost all horses in horse culture globally.
Right.
Something that had been bonded with human beings on a deep, deep level, culturally, spiritually, everything was horses, and it gone back for, I don't know, 4 or 5, 3,000 years, 2,000 years when I think it's like 3,000 years when they think they really started to domesticate the horse, right? And horses have permeated every part of our culture. Our entire societies were built around horses. Mm-hmm. Entire cities were built around horses, right? Beasts of burden. The whole structure of how cities were laid out by city planners was built around that. Mm-hmm. And in the space of 20 to 30 years, or about the space of a horse's lifespan, you could almost look at it like a global extinction event for horses.
Yeah.
They just stopped breeding them. The population of horses dropped by tens of millions across the globe in the space of a short period of time.
Yeah.
And it went from almost every human being alive was interacting with horses on a daily basis to only people in the far country or the wealthy interacted with horses at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that was a huge...
That's crazy.
And that's the kind of thing I think about. I think it had a profound psychological and emotional effect on society and the globe.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's really even thought about it, right? Like, what was it like to grow up around like these giant, like smelly, sweaty beasts, right? Like big ones you don't even see around anymore, to haul like carts. Like if you went into the street, like the mist and stuff was rising off of them in a cold morning, and like their breaths would form clouds like drifting down Fifth Avenue in New York from all the hundreds and hundreds of like giant horses.
Yeah.
And the sound of it, the smell of it, the feel of it, the emotion of it, everything was gone in a generation.
Yeah.
And once again, I'm not making like an argument that we should return to that.
Sure.
I'm just saying it had profound effects on society. And I don't think very many people take a moment to pause and think about what broader implications or broader effects that had downstream. And I don't think we're thinking about it now with technology either.
Yeah, sure. Right. Like I'm good with not saying like this is right, this is wrong. But I am interested in that topic of like talking about it, and I mean, people should come to their own conclusions, but it does seem to be the nature of man to make something, market it as good, and get it rolling. Like it's just what happens, and
it's just what happens. That's the thing. That's part of the theme of this book.
Yeah, and
I'm not making judgment calls on. The thing I would just ask people to do is realize that anyone telling you that it's all positive is trying to sell you something, and they're lying to you. There's always negative impacts to almost anything that exists.
Yeah.
So if someone's trying to tell you there's no negative impacts to social media or cell phone obsession or constant interconnectivity or surveillance through, like cell phones, of course they're not telling you the truth. And it's like a first principle. Like there's always negative impacts to any new thing on previous existing structures. There is nothing that's all good as far as like human inventions.
Yeah. So, right. So quick little story. My wife's uncle was a computer engineer developing kind of the personal computer in various companies and stuff. And, like he was telling us, just like at the time, they're clued in on what the marketing is, which is personal computer. It's the best thing ever. You're going to work from home and you can get your work done in like half a day. So you can work from home for half a day. And they're making it, and they're like, okay, like our boss is going to pay us the same amount of money to work from home for only half a day. Like that's a ridiculous notion. But that's the marketing. It's
It never turns out to be true.
Right. Yeah.
If farmers or anyone was being paid by productivity, right? We'd all be millionaires because productivity has continued to rise exponentially because of technology.
Yeah, definitely.
But compensation for workers has not risen, particularly in like the United States. You can look up the graph, but compensation decoupled from productivity in about 1976.
Interesting. Wow.
So we're actually far, far more productive and faster at everything we do because of technological advance, but actual real wages haven't risen since 1976 in relation to inflation for most people.
Yeah. That's
and so, I think at some point something will happen and it'll rebalance. It always does. It never goes on forever. There's always like restructurings and rebalances of things like that. But yeah, we can be far more productive. I love social media in a way, right? Yeah. I understand like the siren call of it, right? particularly in the early days before the algorithm started to destroy things, to crush things.
Interesting.
When you could actually get real organic engagement because they were trying to get people hooked on it, like Facebook in like 2010 or 2009.
Yeah.
It was like the Wild West out there, right? Like, you would post something and almost everyone would see it on their wall if they scrolled very far because there was no algorithmic sorting of posts.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole discussion in itself. I've read different research papers, and a lot of it I just figured out through experimenting myself. Facebook they know exactly how long Ben Schipper is going to scroll on average when he logs into Facebook. And so they, in real time, sort through your posts, the posts of the friends that you follow, and show you a selection that you will scroll through in 5 minutes because they know that you on average, only scroll for 5 minutes. I'm making up. I mean, you could scroll for an hour. I don't know. But they know that for every individual user. That's part of the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
So they will show you posts more often of people you interact with more often.
Yeah.
And they also know how much engagement you need on your posts to continue to come back. So if you need, say, 40 likes on a post in order for you to post again within the next week, or in order for you to continue to come back and interact with the Facebook wall, if you need those 40 likes, they will continue to show it to more and more of your friends until you reach that base layer of interaction. This is not just something I made up. This is how they run their company. Instagram as well.
Yeah.
So,
I believe it. Yeah. I mean, it's just like I'm making a comic and I'm trying to, you made a comic. We're trying to do everything we can to make it as good as possible. And that's just one person. And we're focused on writing, drawing, coloring, lettering. Like there's so many minute details even inside those things that are fascinating. And I mean, extrapolate that onto a company with, billions of dollars and lots of people dedicated to making something work well. And it just looks like I think what we have is a result of all of that industry. And without putting a moral thing on it, it's just like fascinating what people can make. And it's also a little scary.
I think the thing is I always back out, and like I say, I don't put moral judgments on new technology. That's true if you isolate the technology in and of itself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in pursuit of growth and profits, immoral things will be done with those new technologies consistently.
Yeah.
If there's one thing we can guarantee, it's that companies will, in search of growth and profits, do immoral things. And you can look no further than the automobile industry's lobbying to keep seatbelts out of vehicles. They really pushed hard to make sure seatbelts wouldn't get put in vehicles because it would be an extra cost. Okay. And it saved like 1 million lives since it was put in, since seatbelts and airbags and all this. I'm dead serious. You can look it up. They really fought tooth and nail. Court cases, everything. Ad campaigns to make people, they tried to convince you that if you got in a wreck, you'd be trapped in the car by your seatbelt, so seatbelts shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
And, look, as far as immoral actions, look no further than Facebook. When it came out that in like 2010, I think, Facebook was running psychological experiments on the users. And this is confirmed. You can look this up.
Yeah.
That they were showing people depressing posts. They were showing people posts.
Sound went off for a second.
Like a group of people post with negative words, and then try to see if those people would then post negative posts of their own, right? Like they were trying to see if depressing posts were actually contagious.
Yeah.
That's something Facebook did. And we know about that experiment they run. We don't know what else they're doing. So I guess my thing to people would say, like, just caution.
Yeah. I'm that's great. I mean, I'm not surprised at anything that could is happening and could be happening and whatever else. I think that's really interesting. So like this book, I mean, it's a story, it's a narrative, it's beautifully drawn, and there is so I mean, I'm assuming, would you classify this as a sort of a moral tale or a ethical journey, or I think these things are inside every hero's journey,
right?
So it's not like it's
well, I mean, it's hard to write a book to write something that doesn't have any of that in.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, even if you just have like a little stick figure wandering across the desert, you're putting it. There's something in there, right? You're saying something.
Yeah.
It's not so much a wanting to put that kind of thing into a book as realizing the inevitability of it, and so trying to say the right thing or say something in particular.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. I think it's a mistake if people think that they can just make art and put it out in the world and it doesn't mean anything. It always means something.
Right.
Yeah. Right? Even the act of you thinking it won't mean something makes it mean something.
Yeah.
Right? Even that like nihilistic idea of I'm just going to make art that means nothing and you put it out into the world, that itself means something, right?
Yeah.
And it might not be the thing you meant it to mean. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's the way I look at it is like a chemistry experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can have your chemistry set as a kid and you're mixing stuff up into a vial and you mix like a certain percentage of acids and different things together, but when you take it out of the test tube, when you pour it into the world, it suddenly interacts with things you have no control over, right? What chemical reaction you have when you cast it to the winds is completely beyond your control. You can't isolate that.
Yeah.
And so you can isolate the mixture that you make, the initial solution that you create, and keep it in a pristine glass vial. But the minute it's set loose, it can have like a violent reaction,
Yeah.
You could toss it out there and it hits nuclear material. You don't know, right?
Yeah. That's great.
All you can do is make the bbest solution you can. You can't, can't guarantee how it's going to interact with anybody.
Yeah. I love this, and I like recording something or talking with people and sharing it with a certain audience. I mean, I'm sure most people who follow me here on YouTube are artists, and they want to learn about either comics or drawing or painting or something.
Sure.
And I love being able to talk about these things that aren't on their surface connected to like visual art or writing a story. But to me, they're very, very much a part of writing and creating something that is going to be shareable and meaningful to people when I do release it or when I do make the thing. I did want but I do obviously want to talk about comics more specifically, and I wanted to ask, how do you view writing and drawing a comic? Like, what does that mean to you? Are these two separate disciplines? Is it all the same to you? The pictures with the pictures and the words together?
You know the answer to that, because I've told you before, but for the audience, I think it is, you can't separate the two, right? And I think you can and you can't. I mean, most comics are done through collaboration that way, right?
Yeah, right.
Where you have a writer, and then you have a comic artist, then you colorist, inker, all the different steps that you go through, and the best comics in the world have been created that way, right? I think the key with that is the writer a comics writer? Does the writer understand comics? Do they understand what a comic book is? You can't just take a novelist and say, write me a comic, and they don't actually even like comics. Maybe they hate comics, right? But they think it's like, yeah, it's a good opportunity, and they write something. Yeah. Because that's just what that is that's a comic adaptation of a book. That's not a comic. Yeah. Right? That's the artist taking if it's not written in such a way by someone who's intentionally writing a paneled comic. Yeah. And you can tell right away a lot of times when that happens, when you can just pick it up and start reading it, and you're like, oh, look, the person just wrote a story, right? And wrote some dialogue scenes, and then the artist came through and tried to fix everything and tried to twist the art around it to make it, right? Yeah. Because the art should be 90% of the words. The art should be telling the story you don't always see that. I'm not saying that a novelist or somebody can't learn how to do that, but I think they need to understand what comics are and how they work, how visually the words can mix with the take just a great comic like Watchmen or something, right? Yeah. If you go and look at the thumbnails for that, have you ever done that? Looked at the paneling thumbnails?
No, I haven't. I haven't even read the book.
It's maddening. Yeah. It's like looking at hieroglyphics. Yeah. When they laid out the plot, when they laid out the panels, the pages, the person who was initially drawing that out, it's just word bubbles and blocks for people. There's nothing. You get nothing. You got to really be a talented artist, a talented comic artist, to look at that plotting that they did for the pages to fit with the writing and even understand what it is. Yeah. Right? But you can look at it and see, the word bubbles need to be this big on this panel because the pages are going to be 8 by 10.5 or whatever a comic is, right? And they were talented people. They clearly knew what they were doing. But it's fascinating to me to look at that. I think it was in a Making of Watchmen book or something I was looking at.
Yeah, it's a great.
And they knew what they were doing to such an extent that they could communicate with each other almost in a shorthand. Right? Where someone, a layperson, could look at that page and have no clue what's going on, right? This thumbnail page of what the pages or layout is supposed to be like. But the artist for Watchmen was able to look at that and say, I'm going to make a fantastic page with this. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It was just very, I don't know if I'm describing it correctly, but it goes to the whole matter of collaboration. Are you in communication? Are you synced up? Are you all working towards a specific goal, and you know what that goal is supposed to look like to a certain degree in the end? Yeah. And I think that can work great. Yeah. Or if you don't get it all right, I guess I would say it's like the gears of a clock. The more gears you add, the more precise you have to be in how they mesh together to get it to work in the end. Yeah. And that's why I'm in awe of people who make movies, for instance. that any movie ever succeeds and turns out good at the end is an absolute miracle.
Yeah.
It is. It's a miracle. It's because you're dealing with like 30 or 40 people.
Yeah.
In key roles that any one of them could sink the whole film if they do it wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So the more complex it gets and the more people you add, the more difficult I think it is to get it to work, which makes comics in a way pretty nice. Because even at like your worst point, you're still only dealing with like 3 or 4 people.
Yeah. Okay. So, but we're not. We're actually dealing with just ourselves.
Right. Just us. which has specific drawbacks. If I was dealing with an inker,
mm-hmm.
I would have finished this book 3 years ago.
Oh yeah.
If I was dealing with a colorist, I would have finished this book 4 years ago.
Yeah. I think the same thing too. It's like, I mean, these are both of our. Yours is Psychedelic, Singularity. Mine is Joe Death and the Graven Image, and they're our first books.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just stop that call. They're our first books, and we're, I would say, learning a tremendous amount. I mean, learning everything, basically. I mean, I didn't work in comics.
I did nothing.
You didn't work in comics. Like, I like comics. I grew up, reading Star Wars comics, really, essentially. And so I was never really that plugged into the whole history of comics in the Marvel or DC or superhero stuff. And so there's a significant amount of things that I don't know and I'm trying to learn. But a lot of times I'm looking at novels and classic literature and movies more often than comics themselves. But yeah, I mean, it's a crazy amount of stuff to learn and then implement. Have you? How do you think you've succeeded, or at the end of this book, you can't say specifically how it's going to be received, but do you think you've nailed one certain thing?
Yeah, the way to understand it is, I say it took me 7 years to do the book, but in reality, I wrote like 3 books.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I had the initial idea, and then it had to go through revisions. Yeah. I had initial pages. A lot of those got thrown out. Right? Like I've done at least 2 or 3 major reworks of this book.
Okay, yeah.
To get it to its final stage.
That seems the same.
And that was the process of me learning to do comics as well as I know how to do them now. I'd never done a comic before. When I was like 7 years old, I did something called the Great Gopher War, apparently, which I'd completely forgotten about. And I found it actually this last trip home. I found it in a box of my old school papers.
Yeah.
It was a comic. It was like 10 pages long about these gophers fighting each other. And awesome. I was probably like 6 years old. I could barely write words, but I had labeled it and it was stapled together. It was, a little book.
Yeah.
And then in 2007, I did like a little like 6-page sort of a sequential thing. It was terrible. But other than that, I never even tried to do any form of sequential art at all. So, but I had this idea. I had this vision of what I wanted to do. And I wanted to make something that was not traditional. I wanted to make something that, I just was struck with the one idea is, which of course I found out why people don't do this. I was like, why don't people make comics without square panels? Right? Like, why do people just make square panels for all the comics? It doesn't matter what comic it is. It's all square panels. I'm going to make a book where every page the panels are all unique, right? They're divided in twisting forms and things like this, right?
Yeah.
Turns out it's 5 or 6 times more work.
Yeah.
You can't switch panels out or take a panel out. You have to make the panels fit.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
But at the same time, I honestly have fallen in love with that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I will do strictly square panels even going forwards.
Yeah. I mean,
now,
yeah.
In how they divide it and how they're divided, I divide the panels a lot of the times with like organic elements within the page. I don't think I can see myself doing that again.
Yeah.
That's an enormous amount of extra work. So much. Maybe someday. But but as far as just like panels that don't fit into a square, I like it. I don't see why. If you're willing to put in the extra work, I think it can lend itself to a unique experience for the reader.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll be showing visuals of your book and some of the pages that are finished.
Sure.
And so people will notice that like everything is organic, like looking. And
that fit with the feeling of the book.
Yeah. And so is that in a way a design, like you can draw in a different way. You could be a little bit more formulistic in a panel sense, but the whole gist of the book, the whole, like you saw the need to the form to match the function of the story of the book.
Yes.
And so you're fabricating everything, and like
drawing in square or rectangular panels would have been much easier.
Yeah.
And actually works a lot better for different storytelling elements, to be honest.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, how long did it get for you to be able to draw in that language? It's like a very specific language that has to be communicated. I mean, you are the person speaking it or writing it, but
right.
it has to be read by someone else.
It comes from how I actually develop each page, I think. Which was probably different. I think of the page as like a scene, and I think of the page visually in my mind before I even do thumbnails. I visualize it as a whole page, not panel by panel.
Okay.
So I think of the book as the whole page, and then I start building it up in my mind of what's gonna be happening in this page. That's what I think of, and then I start visualizing it. Is it going to be longer panels at the bottom? Is it going to be split up the middle? Is it going to be a cave sequence where there's no actual break between the panels? There's just like different parts of a cave, and then the characters are in the different parts of the cave, and those create the panels. Yeah. Right? And it does require a little more heavy lifting on the part of the reader. And I actually was advised strongly against that by some people that were actual cartoonists. Yeah. Right? When I told them my plan for this back in like 2005, I was really getting into it. And they're like, you can't do that. I was like, why not? And they're like, well, because the readers are used to like simple progression. You can't do something different. And I think my response was along the lines of, I was like, listen, manga sells like millions of copies and people are reading the books backwards. Yeah. From a Western standpoint, if American readers can read entire 200-page manga backwards, they can put in a little extra heavy lifting to like understand my non-traditional paneling. I think I'll be like, I love that. I have trust in the reader that they'll be able to figure it out.
Yeah. I love the topic and the way in which whoever's creating something has someone in mind. If they're trying to communicate, I mean, so it's either sort of right into lowest common denominator of like child will understand this, therefore I'm going to do this, like. Fresh.
Well, that was the other thing. They said I couldn't use long words. It was the same person. They were like, no non-traditional panelings, and everything has to be below a 5th grade level, or nobody will ever buy it.
Gosh. Okay, so
and I was like, well, I can't go along with that.
Well, no, I mean it's I would say, no ill will toward this person, but the idea.
Well, here's the thing. It's good advice if you want to move like massive amounts of volume of comic books.
or if you just want to be in the standard and not set
Right.
any new, lay any new foundation for somebody else. I mean, there's a risk with there's a reward and a risk. There's a reward tied to every risk, and I love that you're placing a risk. You've chosen it, stuck with it, and you're going to see how it's received. And you're not writing to you. It's not like someone that's it's not like someone that has never read a comic book would pick up your book and not be able to not be able to enter it. I mean, I think that's exciting.
Well, yeah, I think anybody could read it.
I think so too. Yeah.
And
because
I will say about that person, once they actually saw my book, right, when they actually saw what I was done, they were very supportive, and enthusiastic. I just don't think they could imagine what I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, when
they imagined I would do it poorly. Which, to be honest, is was a better bet than I would do it well.
Sure. Yeah. I get that. It's like
I'm not going to fault them for that.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw your drawn pages, I was like, I can't make head nor tail of that. But when you colored it, I was like, oh, okay. Like,
well, that was the other thing, is I had to envision it fully colored while I was drawing it in black and white, because it does not read at all as a black and white.
Yeah.
And that's not the case for most comics. Most comics can be printed in color or black and white, and they read just as well. But it's so darn confusing if it's just black and white due to the nature of how I drew it. I had to fully visualize it in color as I drew it in black and white.
Right. There's no blacks except for the line on the original art. And that's really interesting. I mean, it seems odd, but then, if someone's thinking about Mobius, that's...
Mobius and Geoff Darrow.
Oh yeah, Jeff. I think
Jeff Darrow.
Yeah, Jeff Darrow.
And he actually worked with Mobius, which makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
That both use that exact style. There's no blacks anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I draw now too, just in pencil on paper, and I don't do ink, and I don't spot my blacks with ink. I do in Photoshop, but it's weird drawing something and really not liking the result of what that is until you add something new to it. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's so, sort of, it's, do you have a favorite part of the process of making a comic? Inking
it for sure.
That's your favorite part?
Because it's the easiest.
Yeah. But do you get
penciling pages is definitely the part I dislike the most. It's incredibly intensive. I can't listen to audiobooks or podcasts while I'm doing it. I have to listen to plain music or nothing at all. I have to be constantly mentally engaged.
Yeah.
To do it. Sure. It's difficult. It's very hard.
So there's a experience of doing something joy. But then there's also a realization joy, I think. For me, when I get the color, I guess when I finish a page, I do get, or I'm on the color and I grasp the feeling and the mood of it, and it's working. I get so excited. Does that happen to you at the, it's usually I think I nailed it. Maybe I didn't.
Very end coloring. If I can get the colors to work, that feels real great.
Yeah.
And the same way with inking. If I can get an inked page to turn out really, really nice, and I get it all the way finished, it feels very good.
Yeah.
But it's that final step with the colors, everything working together, and it really actually looks how I envisioned it.
Yeah.
That's very nice.
Yeah. So we're going to talk for a while. Whoever's here, thank you for watching. So definitely go back it on Kickstarter. It is 10 days left? 10?
14 days left.
Okay, 14 days left. Go back it.
And we have reached our goal, so it is happening, but I really urge people to get a copy.
Yeah.
It's going to be the easiest way to actually get a hold of a copy, to be honest with you. Yeah. I don't have an online store right now, so this will get you a copy of the book if you're interested and you want to see it. And every bit we go beyond our goal helps me actually finish this faster.
Yeah.
All the more time I can focus on this book.
Yeah. Support a real writer and artist working out.
I'm trying. I guess I look at it the same way as I look at science.
Okay. Do it.
Right? There are no scientists. There are people who do science.
Yeah.
Right? If you're trained as a scientist and you got a degree as a scientist, but then you just start publishing your opinions with no scientific backing, you're not a scientist. You're just a crackpot. Right? Yeah. If you're doing science from an actual hard science perspective, you are a scientist.
Yeah.
If you're an artist if you're doing art.
Yeah.
So you don't need a degree to be an artist. You don't need accolades to be an artist. If you're creating art, you're an artist. If you stop creating art, you're someone who did art at one point. I don't know if I'll call you an artist. Yeah. Maybe that's like the knife's edge of existing in the moment sort of a thing. Yeah. I'm an artist when I'm doing art.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So have you thought about your next book, your next work?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you want to talk about? What you're
I'm not going to tell. I'm not going to give specifics. I don't want to let it go. But sure. It's I want to do it in a strictly fantasy setting.
Yeah.
Right. So in no ties to the material, actual reality world. I've had this idea. I first wrote the actual seeds of this idea when I was 11 years old.
Okay.
I had a little notebook and I came up with this concept, and I drew all these different crazy creatures and things like this, and it has of course completely changed and evolved 1,000 times since then.
Yeah.
I haven't really actually written anything down or drawn anything about it in probably 16 years, but I have it in a Rolodex in my mind. I have it in my mind library, and I think about it when I'm out on a walk or whatever. I'll bring it out of the files and dust it off, and what character will I put in it? What's the setting? How's the setting changed? What are things going to look like?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have the idea for it. I don't want to make it as long, and I want to just do an initial shorter book and see if I can keep it simple and see if it resonates with the public.
I think that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. I want to do a completely different art style as well. I mean, I think a lot of the detail is great for this book, because the book that I just did, the Psychedelic Singularity, because it fits with the psychology of the book. But I want to do 30% high detail, 70% broader open background colors and shapes and things like this. More like a traditional, like a Mobius comic.
Yeah.
Just for economy's sake.
Yeah.
I want to actually finish this thing in under 7 years.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm excited.
I'm looking forward to it, and I hope if this Kickstarter is successful enough, that will lead to the next book for sure.
Yeah. Perfect. Cool. Yeah, I like that. It does seem to be some of the writers I like will do. I mean, maybe myself included. We'll be doing our first book, and it tends to feel a little bit more philosophical. I mean, it's still a story, and I think Psychedelic Singularity is still a fun adventure. But it does seem to be that you're going towards more of a new fantasy experience, a narrative.
I want to do a simpler, cleaner, more straightforward story.
Yeah. But
just to try it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for something different.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you all for watching, and thank you, Shen, for being here.
Thanks for tuning in, folks.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Later. Let me. Oh no, it's not coming out. Okay.